Stride length is a really important component of the running economy equation. And what I mean by this is this equation, your cadence, which is how many steps you take per minute, times your stride length, which is literally how long your strides are, equal your running pace. So the longer we can get your stride length, at the same time as the higher we can get your cadence, in theory, the quicker we will run. But it's not quite as simple as that when we break these two components down into their respective parts. The most common mistake we see people make is that they either practice their cadence and their cadence goes up to get them faster, but unfortunately their stride length goes down, therefore cancelling out the good work of the increased cadence. Or actually the opposite happens as well. Their stride length can go up, but in doing so their cadence goes down to allow themselves the time for that longer stride, and therefore this cancels each other out as well. So how do we improve our stride length component without our cadence falling? Before I go on to this, it is useful to address the question of how long should your stride length be? Because although your cadence shouldn't be 180, it is a useful guideline to base your cadence off. If it's much below 180, we can probably give a bit more, and if it's above 180, potentially our stride length is being negatively affected, although it does differ athlete to athlete. With stride length, there's really not the same golden ratio to aim for, even if it is a little bit of a mythical golden ratio. Usually, taller runners will have a longer stride because they simply have longer limbs, they have a longer reach. However, your stride length is really based on your power and your limb length, not necessarily your height. Some people have really long torsos and actually shorter legs, and therefore they'll have a shorter stride length, but actually they might have a really high cadence, and that's where they get their strength and their power from. It's usual that the quicker you are, the longer your stride length will be, but this is one of the metrics you will probably be able to get from your Garmin or your running watch. But one thing to definitely look out for is the variability of your stride length. So some people get all of their pace from their cadence. When they compare their best efforts pace or their interval pace to their easy running pace, their cadence will jump massively between the two, but their stride length stays more or less the same. If this is the case, then you can probably work on your stride length quite a bit. You can also probably work on your stride length if your cadence is probably more or less optimal for your pace at the moment. On the flip side, those who don't need to work on their stride length will be those who have a strong variability in their stride length already, or those people who would find it much more beneficial to work on their cadence. So have a look at your stats and just ask yourself the question, does it vary between your intervals and your best effort pace and your easy pace? If yes, then brilliant, we're on the right lines. If not, then maybe we've got some work to do. And another thing, really good thing to do, is to record yourself running, because there is two angles, which I'll go into in a second, which basically make up your stride length. But very briefly, I just wanted to touch base on the risks of increasing your stride length. So risk one, we've already mentioned, your cadence will fall because you need longer in that motion of extending your stride, therefore your cadence falls, and therefore you don't actually increase your running efficiency. The second risk though is much bigger, and it is the risk of injury. If you increase your stride length in the wrong way, you will likely start heel striking and therefore putting much more pressure through your ankle, your knee and your hip joints, and this could lead to injury down the line. Anything from impact injuries of the hip to shin splints is associated with that overstride. So we don't want to increase your stride length forwards in an overreach. So how do we want to increase it? These are the two biomechanical angles which make up your stride length. They are your knee drive at the front, which is the angle from your hip to your knee. It tends to be much higher with sprinters than endurance runners. So I'm not saying lift your knees as high as you possibly can, but we'll come on to the exact specifics in a minute. And also your heel lift at the back, which is how high your heel is lifted there off the ground and how high it passes through underneath you before taking the next stride. We can see the first athlete here has a shallower knee drive and therefore is not opening up enough space underneath themselves to really stride into. And they can also see their heel lift at the back isn't very far above the ground, so therefore this foot is going to fall only slightly in front of where that foot has struck, and therefore this is going to be the limit of their stride length. Athlete B, on the other hand, has a good amount of knee drive, slightly exaggerated for the picture, excuse the rudimentary drawings, and a good heel lift at the back. And the best measure of this is how high does this heel come through under your body. Film yourself running and see, does your heel fall mid-calf or does it stay in line approximately with your knee? Because there's two ways of achieving that. Firstly, your knee can be higher. Secondly, your heel can be higher. If our heel can come through approximately where our knee was, then we will have a much longer stride. And we can just see that this angle is the cycle which will happen again and again and again for this runner, and this runner is just going to have a shorter cycle. They are going to take so many more steps to cover the same amount of ground. Now initially this does sound like cadence, because you might see the amount of ground that this athlete covers and the amount of steps they're taking is much more than the amount of ground that this athlete covers, and their amount of strides are a lot less. But the fact is this runner will be a lot further on by the time that this runner achieves this distance. They are keeping up their cadence at the same time as extending their stride length. So when you think about extending your stride length, don't think about reaching further in front of you, because then you will heel strike, and this heel strike or this overstride landing so much further in front of your center of gravity causes a lot of shock waves to pass through your ankle, your knee and your hip, but also it puts this braking effect on. This backwards propulsion from reaching out in front of yourself, this braking force, this braking action will actually slow you down, because then this runner needs to overcome this before taking the next stride forwards. So they're braking and then overcoming. Instead, they're going to think, instead of extending from the shin down, instead of thinking about extending from the knee to overstride, they're going to think about this angle from the hip to the knee, opening up slightly more space underneath themselves to stride out into, and still landing with a soft-ish knee, so that by the time they strike the ground, they will actually be more or less over their, they'll be more or less landing under their center of gravity. And at the same time, they're also going to think about picking this heel up slightly further at the back, so that this heel falls through slightly higher up, and therefore giving themselves more of a stride length in front of them. It's almost thinking about extending your stride at the back to open up space to move into, rather than just reaching forward. It can feel slightly counterintuitive at the moment, and in the moment, and usually one or the other works for one athlete, and it actually encourages the same thing because they're so closely related. So what I recommend you do here is, firstly, just put some strides into your warm-up, put some strides into your speed sessions, and in your speed sessions, every few intervals or so, just think about what are you actually doing with your stride length. Can you pick your heels up further at the back? Can you extend your knee drive at the front? Focus on one at a time, because they will both be creating more or less the same effect. One will work better for your brain and your physiology than the other, most likely. And the second thing to do is to note not only how much your pace increases when you do this, but checking that your cadence doesn't fall. Your cadence might even increase over time, which is brilliant, but you definitely want to make sure your cadence doesn't fall. It's not to the detriment of your cadence when you want to extend your stride length. The second thing you can do is you can put some drills into your warm-ups, such as banded knee drives at the front and banded heel lifts at the back as well. Just practicing that range of motion before you go through your run, so that a little bit of it seeps through into your actual run. Any range of motion work that you can do is going to be beneficial to extending your stride length a little bit if it's something that you are struggling with. I hope that helps. Any questions, just let me know.